The first section of your action research project will be entitled The Introduction and Rationale. This is where you describe who you are and why you want to get some answers. The goal of the intro and rationale is to combine information about the setting of your action research project and the story behind the project, making it a smooth narrative that gets the reader engaged in your work's context. In other words, it's who you and your students are and why you want to get some answers. As part of the context of the project, it's important to communicate to the reader a clear picture of the overall context of the action research. The way you write the beginning of your paper, this first section, lays the foundation for the rest of your work, including its significance, your credibility, and the potential impact on you, your teaching, and your students. Storytelling is important to the process. Instead of writing about your setting, illustrate it for the reader using stories and anecdotes taken from your experiences, reflections, and/or data. Introduce major players in your analysis and the results. It must be clear to the reader that you're thoroughly immersed in and engaged in your setting, and are therefore qualified to make credible analyses and interpretations. By referring to some data here, you signal to the reader prior to the rest of the paper what type of research this is and how data were generally collected. You'll notice throughout this presentation some of the items are in red. These indicate things that will need to be written later in the project. Vulnerability. It is also important to communicate to the reader a clear picture of yourself as the teacher-researcher and how your own biases and experiences and assumptions influence how you landed on the critical problem or question of your project, and B, why studying that question or problem is important to you. This may be woven into your illustration of context by including your own thoughts, memories, and experiences. If there are key quotes from others that underscore your ideas, consider including the quote in this section. So again, this is in red because as you do your review of literature, there may be important things that other people have said that you'll want to come back and include in this particular section. Your research question and/or problem. Bring this section, your first section, to a climax by laying out your research question and problem in detail. And provide a condensed description of how you examined the question and/or problem. Notice this condensed description must come later in the process after you have completed doing the implementation of your work. Explain briefly your action plan regardless of when it was developed. Your action plan can either be developed prior to data collection, where you're viewing the project as a teaching experiment. So the plan is developed prior to the data collection, is implemented, data is collected, and some conclusions are drawn. If you take the approach of this project being a rich exploration, your action plan is developed as a result of data collection. Some final considerations. Less formal writing is acceptable in this section. Using I, we, think, believe, consider, etc. are all fine in this particular portion of your work. You should try to deliver an intuitive understanding of your project before finishing the first page. By the time the reader has finished the first page, he or she should have a good sense of what it is that you're examining and why you're examining it. Return to this section to fill in with information gleaned later in the process. You will need to return to this section. It isn't complete until the very end of your project when you've gone back and filled in any of the red portions that were a part of this particular presentation. And finally, this is probably the most important thing to you at this point, knowing that it's typically 3 to 5 pages long. So your first section is typically 3 to 5 pages long, and we're talking about standard sorts of margins, standard font size, and double spaced.